How do you define God?
So we're talking false gods then?
Well, am I a heretic?
How do you define God?
First and foremost, the words truth, being, goodness, the epitome, the most good, the highest good, or truth itself. But I don't mean to be too vague either, because I also think God is defined as the creator. One thing I would say is the fact that it's a capital G God question is pretty important. So I would also define God as any value. I don't want to break it down too much by analogizing to something else, but I think you can make a god out of almost anything if you really wanted to. I think you could absolutely worship the gods of Greek mythology without knowing that you do or meaning to. Just for example, you have Dionysus. There's millions of people who celebrate Dionysus without thinking the word Dionysus. But when we use capital G God, it's the greatest of all gods. All gods are below him, and the highest possible value. I think that's the best I can do with that question, so I'm going to have to ask you, am I a heretic?
I think your question may have set yourself up for a little bit of failure here. So I would not say you're strictly a heretic, but I think you're trying to get at steps 4, 5, and 6, jumping over step 1, which I think is very natural for people of faith to do, because we like to define things. We like to have characteristics and traits and whatnot. And that's good, and God has all of those things. What's easy for us as Christians to forget, especially Christians who go to a place like Notre Dame and who study theology and are engaged in the life of the mind, we forget that God is first and foremost a person, more than a set of ideals, more than a set of values, more than a set of attributes, and because God is a person, he is undefinable in the way that any person is undefinable. It would be awkward for me to say, define Charles or define Elizabeth, because a definition sort of is inherently limiting. The question of how do you define God is important, but the basic and most fundamental premise is that he is inherently undefinable because he's more than just a set of parameters. He is the creator of the world. He is the one who loves us and loved us first. He is the one that sang the world into being. And so we can know all of these things about God and derive traits, characteristics, definitions about the highest good. That's an excellent one. But all of those exist in the fact that they define a real, true, living, existing being in the persons of the Trinity, exemplified in the love of the Father, the love of the Son, the love of the Holy Spirit. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it does. A couple questions come to mind. In the Old Testament, I believe God gives Moses the closest to what spoken word has to God's name. And when people translate it to English, they say something along the lines of, I am who am, or I am the one who am. What's going on with that? It's very confusing. Sometimes with language slip, because words continue to mean different things over time. Even the first time it was translated into English, it could be interpreted differently hundreds of years later, even in the same language.
It's helpful for us to put ourselves in that context, right? The relationship of the people of Israel to God prior to the time of Christ is a unique relationship. It's a relationship of trust and belief, right? They are his chosen people. They are his privileged people. They are the one with whom he made the covenant. He brought them out of Egypt and delivered them from the grasp of Pharaoh. But it's a relationship that is always inherently mediated. Their relationship with God exists in their relationship with the law, because the law of Moses is the thing that they have closest to God's gift to them and given to them in a very concrete way. It's mediated through sacrifice. It's mediated through the Torah, the Pentateuch, the law. We forget sometimes that our relationship with God inherently looks different precisely because he decided to sort of break that barrier by entering our world, taking our form, taking our flesh, and being one with us. We have the name of God because he's given it to us. He is Jesus, and he calls us to know him by name and to walk with him as a friend and a brother, right? And that would be completely out of the rational mind of someone living in the time of ancient Israel. So I think for them, it's trying to express what does this word capture in our understanding of God, and that's hard. And it's hard for us to understand that framework precisely because we live in a post-resurrection world, a world where the Son of Man entered into our being and revealed himself to us in our flesh and in our form.
How do you define God?
So God, first and foremost, I would say is a person. At his core, he's a person. He's the first mover, the creator. But the question of capital G God or lowercase g God comes into the question. So I think if we're talking lowercase g, if it's...
So we're talking false gods then?
Well, not necessarily false gods, of course. We can create a God out of
absolutely
anything, right? Like if we wanted to, worship money,
right?
We could spend our entire life just pursuing money at no consideration to what we're doing to others. We can see plenty of examples where people make money into their God. So I think our God, our lowercase g God, is what we value the most. But capital G God is the greatest possible value. He who has created everything, he who everything proceeds from, being itself and truth.
There we go. Now you're getting at it.
I'm not super happy with my answer on that, but I gotta ask you, am I a heretic?
You're not a heretic.
Oh, that's great. That's good news. So what's the answer to how do you define God?
You touched on it with the first mover of Thomas Aquinas and going back to all of that. That's great. But God is a communion of perfect love, which therefore creates, and therefore we share in that communion, which is the Trinity of love. Whether that's the catechism answer, I don't have it directly in front of me.
Sure.
That's the best way I can, a perfect communion of love of which we participate.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.